welcome to another episode of the Soothing Semantics podcast. I'm your host, Rafi Pinsky. Make sure to subscribe, smash the like button, leave your comments. For all of your real estate needs in South Florida, you know where to go. Make sure to follow me at Rafi the Realtor on Instagram. Make sure to sign up to my weekly newsletter to stay in the know of everything real estate. And without further ado, we have a very, very fascinating guest, somebody who has done quite a lot of time in the police force. So I'm going to quickly introduce him. Thank you. First off, Derek, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you, Rafi, for the invitation. I appreciate being here.
Absolutely. So to quickly introduce you, you are a lecturer, trainer, and the author of Ego, Authority, Failure. You have 29 years of law enforcement experience, 20 of which you served as a team member, leader, and then commander of hostage negotiations teams in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. You are a hostage negotiation and incident command subject matter expert who frequently speaks at hostage negotiation and SWAT conferences across the country. You have a passion for interpersonal communications, and that began when you were selected as a detective in the criminal investigations section of a municipal police agency. You then spent the majority of your law enforcement career in the section as a detective, supervisor, and eventually commander of major crimes. There's a lot to cover here, so we're gonna cover. We're not gonna go into every paragraph.
Yeah, sure.
A lot to discuss. Happy to have you. I think, as you know, I'm former military in the IDF, so it's definitely, this sort of topic is always very interesting to me.
Yeah.
And so to start off, before you even got into the police force and you rose the ranks, you eventually ended up as a commander in hostage negotiations.
Mm-hmm.
What started all that? Where did that begin?
You mean before I got into law enforcement completely, or before I started to become a hostage negotiator and rise through the ranks there?
Before you even got into the academy, the police force.
Yeah. So, I was one of those guys, and I know I've talked to people, so I know that the fraternity is not small, who knew it all after high school. And I decided I was going to wander the earth like Cain from the old TV show Kung Fu and try to find myself. And I landed an odd job as a loss prevention person for a major retail establishment. And I had worked closely with a guy who was a part of that organization, who went on to become a deputy sheriff. And I envied him. And one day he came to have lunch with me at work, and he's all decked out in his uniform. And we're having lunch, and he goes, "Have you ever thought about making the jump, from civilian life to law enforcement?" I said, "Yeah, I've thought about it, but I don't know. I don't know if I don't know." And he goes, "If you've thought about it, what are you going to do about it?" And that was the motivation for me. And so I started to apply at every agency that did not require a college degree. The advice that I was given at the time was, you go with the first agency that tells you yes. And then if that agency doesn't work out for you, at least you have the experience under your belt so you can move on. So I went with the first agency that said yes to me, and I never looked back. I started my law enforcement career in '88. I became a negotiator in '97, team leader 2001, team commander 2004. That's a position I held up until the time I punched out in 2017. Now, my evolution to become a hostage negotiator was a little bit different. I got voluntold to role play for a hostage taking incident, and I was just enamored with what I was seeing as far as what actually went on behind the scenes for police response to a hostage taking. And I said, I'm intrigued by that. And when the opportunity presented itself in 1997, there were 5 vacancies on our team. I applied for one of them and ultimately was selected. And again, it's something that uh, it became a part of my very being. I became a student of the game. I immersed myself in everything related to critical incident management and interpersonal communications. And that's what really has put wind in my sails for most of my adult life.
Wow. So obviously, I want to ask you about specific incidents, and whatever you're able and willing to tell me, by all means. What made the change to go from, say, being an officer in the police force, standard officer as police officer, to saying, okay, now I want to negotiate for hostages.
Um, it's drive mostly.
Okay.
Uh, First of all, for clarity's sake, it's an ancillary position, which means I had a full-time job. My
Hmm.
full-time job was a part of the detective bureau, the criminal investigation section. But my part-time job was as a hostage negotiator. So I had a full-time job, but when an event spun up, I dropped what I was doing on that full-time job and addressed the critical incident. And the driver was I was just intrigued because I learned early in my law enforcement career that I could say specific things in a specific manner to elicit specific information from another person who's initially not inclined to give me that information and use that information to influence their decision making and ultimately their behavior. And when I first started doing that, I was blown away and I wanted more, right? And I first learned this as a street level narcotics guy. And then I said, there's got to be more to it. And so then I became a detective. And so I kicked it up a notch because now my sole job was interview and interrogation to get information out of people who initially tell me, I'm not telling you anything. And the reasons for that vary, but um, to get information out of them in order to accomplish a goal. And so after I was a detective for a few years, I said to myself, what else is there? And then I came across this concept of hostage negotiation, which is the ultimate in crisis communication. This is the ultimate in being able to function under pressure. This is the ultimate in being able to mitigate negative emotions and dynamics on the part of your counterpart so that I'm no longer viewed as a threat, but viewed as an ally in order to influence them into doing what I needed them to do. And as a hostage negotiator, of course, that is surrender. And in the States, as an aside note, is we've got to be pretty good at it. In the States, our success rate is close to 93%. That is to say that 93% of the times that we get called out to help solve one of these problems, we're able to do it successfully 93% of the time. And so that coupled with the psychological aspect, I just fell in love with it and I couldn't let it go. And I still can't let it go, obviously. You see how jazzed up I get when you ask me questions about it.
Right.
So
So,
that's how
so
it
that,
started.
sorry.
I said, that's how it started for me.
Right. Right. Now, obviously, I want to know about specific instances. So, and I'm sure that's what the listeners want to know.
Okay.
Of a specific example. I guess a good place to start is, what was the first one you've ever done? Tell me about that one.
Everybody remembers the first.
All right.
Um, First one, I want to say it was November 6th, 97. I think that was the first one. It was a jumper on a bridge. He was threatening it to hurl himself into the icy waters of the Potomac River. And I was um, I was at work. I heard the call go out. I heard the first units respond on the scene. Now, this particular bridge that he was threatening to jump from is kind of unique because it joins two different states, which means there are jurisdictional issues that come into play. The first third of the bridge it belongs to the state of Virginia. The middle span or the middle third of the bridge belongs to the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., because it spans the Potomac River. The last third of the bridge belongs to the state of Maryland. So there was a weird jurisdictional issue when we first responded to the event. And it was a person who was in a strange relationship with his son and his wife. and you know, he was positing that he couldn't go on anymore and he was going to jump from the bridge. He started to engage the first responders verbally. When I arrived, I took over the voice-to-voice contact with him, and we were on that bridge for about 7 hours. And November over the water in 7 hours in DC was quite cold. But at the end of the event, the jurisdictional issues came into play because where he was most of the time was technically in Washington, D.C. And so Washington, D.C. said that if there is enough enforcement action that's going to be taken against this guy, it's going to be taken by the D.C. Police Department because it's their jurisdiction. However, Derek, since you have already established rapport with this guy, we're going to leave you as the primary negotiator in this. So it was me and my partner working in conjunction with the DC Police Department to solve this particular problem. And 7 hours later, we ultimately solved it. He did jump. He jumped after a non-lethal projectile was fired at him. He did wind up jumping, but we had walked him from the middle portion of the bridge back towards the state of Virginia. Water was less shallow, or was shallower than where it was in the beginning of the event. He was no longer over the construction barges that were placed beneath the bridge. So when he hit the water, he hit primary water and silt, and that probably saved his life. But
Wow. So
it was difficult because this guy was what we call in the business, he's what we call a swami. And a swami is a suicide with other motivations and intention. SWOMI. This is a person who's engaging in suicidal behavior for purposes other than committing suicide, i.e., the attention grabber. And so, but that had no bearing on how I handled the negotiation, because even with a swami, when they realize that the game is up and they've got no other card to play, oftentimes what starts out as a suicide with other motivations and intentions actually becomes a suicide.
well, what I'm wondering is don't suicides often have different intentions? Meaning, isn't it a cry for attention a lot of the time anyway? Isn't it a crime for not a cry? I'm sorry, a not a crime, a cry for acceptance, love, uh, understanding. A lot of the time, they feel alone. They feel like nobody cares. So, how do you differentiate a swami from a typical suicidal person?
The typical suicidal person is not going to give me the time of day. They're going.
Hmm.
Person that wants to kill themselves is going to kill themselves. The only person that we do not have a shot with is the person that's already jumped or the person that's already pulled the trigger.
Right.
And so, to your point, yes, they are frustrated because they are not having some need fulfilled. And from their perspective, nobody is listening to them. And so, in large part, they're going to make them listen. Now, a suicide in a highly public place with a high probability of intervention, I'm suspicious of. Because if you, Rafi, really wanted to kill yourself, that was really your intent and motivation, you wouldn't go to a highly public place unless that public place had some kind of meaning to you. You wouldn't go
Hmm.
to a public place where there was a high probability of somebody stopping you. You would go into your garage and you would run a hose from your tailpipe into your car and you'd cut the car on, and somebody would
Hmm.
discover you sometime later. But the fact that I'm always leaning towards it may being something other than a suicide, depending on the circumstances. And in these circumstances, it was a public place. It was a bridge that was a significant thoroughfare along the 95 corridor. So from Maine to Miami, people are driving that corridor every day, and we shut it down. He knew we were probably going to shut it down. High probability of intervention, because the message that he was trying to send was not directed um, solely at the problem. It was directed at a person. And this was the typical look at what you made me do. type of person.
Mhm. So, for example, somebody was broken up with, and they can't live without that person, and
Yes.
yeah, you ruined my life, right?
Yes. Yeah. And and
If I
and
can't, if I can't have you, nobody can, or some crazy thing like that.
it's yeah, there's some of that. And but this guy was he was a he was a narcissist.
Hmm.
Um Post conversation, I learned a lot after our interaction on the bridge that I didn't know prior to. But there was a lot of things that led us to this conclusion that he was a Swami. First of all, um, he had been taunting us in the hours before the actual event. He would call from different phones within the District of Columbia. He knew we had a warrant for his arrest. Um, Not only was he calling us and taunting us with the 911 dispatchers, but he also had a handheld recorder that he carried with him. And he was narrating every move that he made as he was making his way back from the back from DC to Northern Virginia, ultimately to the bridge.
So, what
Uh,
did that sound? What did that kind of sound like?
um, he was the recording was for his wife or his estranged wife, and it was basically what I said earlier. Look at what you made me do. I'm on the train now. It's not going to be long. It'll all be over soon. Please tell my son that I love him and I'll talk to you later. And then he would stop the recording. And then he'd start it again. Well, just came up out of the train station. I'm walking my way to he actually thought he thought he was going to another bridge that was that leads from Arlington County, Virginia into Georgetown, Maryland. He actually thought he was going to the Key Bridge. And in reality, he wasn't going to the Key Bridge. He was on his way to the Woodrow
Hmm.
Wilson Bridge. And so, why did you have to call the police and the like? So those were what his tape recordings sounded like. Now the recordings that he left or that were made by the 911 center when he called into 911 taunting us were quite interesting as well. In fact, we had a suspicion that he was going to try to violate a protective order and see his wife at her home. So we secured her in a location and we put two of our officers inside the house and they were waiting for him to break into the house and then they were going to snatch him up.
Hmm.
Um, so they're in there doing their surveillance, waiting for this guy to show up. And about 2 hours after they posted inside the location, um, he calls 911 and said, "Hey, I just stopped by the house. Tell those cops I left them a gift out on the back porch." And they go out on the back porch and there's a cheese platter with cold cuts and a bottle of champagne and some fruit. He had gone to the house, he had made the surveillance, immediately turned around and went to a grocery store and bought that stuff and went back to the back porch and laid it on the back porch. This is the kind of narcissism that we were dealing with. Uh,
First of all, I was going to say he can taunt however he wants as long as he doesn't make fun of that stash. As long as because nobody makes fun of makes fun of that stash, there, Derek.
which stash is that?
Your stash, baby.
Oh,
That's right. That's right. That's what you said. Leave the stash out of it. Why would he do what psychological tendency? I mean, I guess you would say, but even narcissism, right? What is it about his personality or feelings in the moment led him to put a cheese platter out there? Is that like what is that? I'm trying to put that
I,
together.
I don't know. I think that was an item of opportunity. It's probably the first thing he saw when he walked into the grocery store.
Okay.
The fact of the matter is, the motivation behind it was he was saying, "Hey, cops, you're not as smart as you think you are.
I know you're there. I know you're
I
there.
I know you're there. I crept up within 10 feet of you. You didn't know it. I left, came back, and crept within 10 feet of you carrying a bunch of crap in my hands, and you still didn't notice me. This is how dumb you are." That's the only and that was the purpose for calling 911, just to say, you're not dealing with an everyday Joe. So that
Right,
was
right.
his
That's
background.
great. It's really crazy how Wow. I couldn't understand what would motivate me to do that. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, I mean, this guy was he was the sharpest knife in the drawer. If you don't believe me, just ask him. He'll tell you. He got caught, air quotes, he got caught because he wanted to get caught, not because of anything that we did. He came off of that bridge on his own volition. We didn't talk him off that bridge. He actually jumped. So
Hmm.
he's always in a topper mentality, and topper mentality is that guy or that woman that always wants to top anything that you say or do.
Right.
That's pretty much where he was. And so that's why the negotiation took as long as it did, because I was busy placating to his ego.
Hmm. Interesting. That sounds like a pretty cool movie scene. Just to throw it in there, it sounds like a it would be a pretty interesting movie scene. I mean, we've all seen something similar in a sense, except for the cheese.
Well, that was real. Most of the things that you get out of the movies right now are not
Hmm.
real, especially when it comes to depicting the proper management of a hostage barricade incident. It's just, Hollywood they do due diligence in that they will hire technical advisors, but they only pay attention to maybe an eighth of what the technical advisors say, because the technical advisor is going to lay it out. Here's how we used to do it. And oftentimes that's not sexy enough for
Right.
Hollywood. Take case in point is the movie The Negotiator. I get asked all the time, um, how realistic was The Negotiator? And my answer is always the same. They got the equipment right. We do use that equipment, but that's about it. And so Hollywood tends to take poetic license with what the technical advisors tell them, which when a guy like me sits down and watches a movie regarding a hostage taking or barricade, nobody wants to sit down and watch it with me because I'm always pulling it apart and I'm ruining it. I ruin it for everyone. So they would rather I not watch it with them.
I feel like I personally would enjoy watching a movie like that with you because I would learn so much more about the actual idea, the day to day of hostage negotiation. This is something I have so many interesting questions. So let's
Okay.
get into this a little bit. I want to know more about your experiences, but then I want to know how it ties into human behavior and maybe how you perceive people from day to day. You know, how you can tell somebody's level of confidence, how you can get a read on their intentions the moment you see them, when they take a look at you, when you make eye contact with them, or when you look at their body language, how hostage negotiation has allowed you to get to know a person quickly, develop friendships, figure out who your enemies are, right? Somebody could be smiling at you but really doesn't have good intentions. So those I want to push that aside for a moment, get a little bit more into your day to day. What was maybe an example of a very tough negotiation you had to do? Maybe hostage negotiation or something that you found to be very challenging.
Uh, my most challenging one is not one that I actually negotiated. I was managing the team. I had ascended through the ranks at this point. But this was the most difficult one because um, it was an outlier from everything that we had been trained on. We had been trained there, so there are two types of incidents. There is a hostage incident, and then there's a non-hostage incident. And so now
Hmm.
you're scratching your head and go, what are you talking about?
Right.
A hostage incident is when somebody's being held for the purposes of having a substantive demand fulfilled by a third party. A non-hostage incident is somebody being held and there is no substantive demand. They make no demand on a third party because they have what they want. And the non-hostage situation is usually the more problematic because there's nothing I can give that person. There's nothing that there's no trade-off. There's nothing that I can do for them because they have what they want. And in this particular case, it kind of looked non-hostage, but it had a different twist to it in that the person being held in a typical non-hostage, the person being held is the focal point of all of the behavior exhibited by the suspect. Think of a domestic dispute that turns violent. Police come. He barricades himself inside the room with his wife and says, "Don't come in here."
Mm-hmm.
That's a typical non-hostage. In this particular case, the guy took his estranged son away from his estranged wife, not because the boy was the focal point of his anger and angst. In fact, it was the mother.
Right.
But he was being held because this is my son. No one's going to tell me when and where I can see my son. So while he was not in danger, and I told them this during the course of the event, I said, this kid is not going to be in any danger from this guy unless and until we try to get in between him and the son.
Right.
And then there's going to be a problem. And so that's what made this one more difficult.
You think he would actually, you think he would threaten or possibly endanger his own son just to have access to his son?
He would, if it came down to us trying to wrest his son from his control, he would rather kill the kid and kill himself. That was my position. He is going to kill the kid and kill himself. It's going to be a murder-suicide if we are not careful with how we do this.
Holy shit. So it's another case of if I can't have him, nobody can.
Exactly. Exactly. And again, his angst, he was focused on his wife. And a part of getting back at her was, I'll show you. Nobody's going to tell me when I can see my son and how I can see my son, which is what the courts attempted to do, which is
Right.
what led to this entire thing.
Was it a 50-50 custody? Was it no custody? Was it 20?
It was in the preliminary stages, but she had gotten a protective order, and he was forbidden from coming within 500 yards of them until the hearing.
Right.
And that, coupled with the consumption of alcohol,
Yeah, that makes sense. That
led
makes
to
sense.
him doing something crazy. What made this equally difficult was the number of negotiators that I had to deploy to deal with him. Um, we had two of them on the phone with him. I had two of them up front, close to the crisis site, inside of an armored personnel carrier, and they were trying to negotiate with the PA system. And then I had a bot that we would send the bot up close to the house, and we would negotiate with him through the robot. And so we work in pairs, we work in teams mostly. And so I've got 6 negotiators that are trying to engage this guy at any one point during this 20-hour event. And so it was really difficult. One of the challenges for any hostage barricade situation is this idea called the action imperative. And the action imperative is a phenomenon where someone in a position of authority over an event like this says, we got to get this thing moving. We need to take a tactical action that's going to change the dynamics of this event. And I'm not saying that you never have to take that under discussion or consideration, but you better be able to defend why you are going to change the dynamics of a situation while everybody is still alive. Because if you change the dynamics, you have to understand that things can go sideways, and they never go sideways slowly. It's going to be in a blink of an eye, everybody's alive, to now there are people dead. So that played a part in it as well, which made it more difficult for me. When we got there initially, the only thing he said to us was, "Everything my wife has told you is a lie." And I got nothing more to say. And he hangs up the phone. Minutes later, his son calls back, and the son is 9 years old at the time. Son calls back and said, I just got off the phone with my grandma, and I just told her what I'm going to tell you. He said if anybody comes in and tries to, if my daddy says if anybody comes in and tries to take me away, he's going to shoot them. Bang. And the kid hangs up the phone. And now we are, we spend the rest of the night trying to ring inside the house, and he's not picking up the phone. We've got,
And I imagine the mother is freaking out.
yeah, she's just beside herself because the actual abduction happened in front of her at her place of work. And so yeah,
So how
she's
so? He just snatched the kid?
um she's going into work. She's worried about, she doesn't know where he is, so she doesn't want to leave the kid at home. He meets her at work as she's walking in with the kid. He snatches the kid. She says, the protective order, I'm going to call the police. The protective order is in effect. He said, I don't care. He's my kid. You're not going to tell me when I get to see my kid. The court's not going to tell me when I get to see my kid. And he throws the kid in the car and drives off. And that's how it started. But all through the night, we're getting no contact with him. We're getting nothing. We know he's in there. We know he's breathing. We know he's alive. We have technical assets deployed that we're pretty confident that he's basically sleeping.
Right.
And we are, we lit up the front of the house to try to get his attention. We're ringing his phone incessantly. At some point, we said, you know what? He's been drinking all day. Let's let him just sleep this thing off, and we'll pick it up in the morning. And that's what we did. Picked it up at 6:30 in the morning. And when he actually called us and said, hey, why don't you call this kid's godmother, and have her come to the house, pick the boy up so he's not late for school. And obviously
Did you think, as somebody of that experience, you're probably like, wait a minute, something's probably going to happen.
Yeah, well, first of all, the problem with that is that we're not going to send a civilian into a hot zone to do something that we're supposed to be doing. So we told them that. We said we can't, that's a non-starter. We have her, the godmother. She's here. We actually let her talk to him. But we'll send an unmarked car up front, and you send the kid out of the front door. We'll pull him in the car. We'll take him to the mom. And he said, no, if I'm not releasing him to anybody. He goes, don't. And then he says something. He says, if you don't send her up here, we're going to have a problem, and it's going to be a shoot 'em up type of problem. So he's starting to make veiled threats about shooting it out with us. But he never did release the kid. In fact,
How old was the guy?
he was 40. He's 47 at the time.
And how old was the kid?
9.
So he had the kid when he
Yeah.
Okay.
It was late. It was late when he had the kid. And at one point, he pushes the kid out onto the front porch. Now, understand, we're tactically at a disadvantage at this house because the house is on a hill. There are a series of maybe 12 steps that lead down to a sidewalk to the street. So he's pretty much in an elevated position. And so he pushes the kid out onto the front porch of the house, and the kid's got on body armor. And I'm like, all right, what does that actually mean? He's now making the kid a part of this play that's running in his head. This kid is no longer no longer an outsider looking in. He's a participant, and he's become a participant because of his father. What message is he sending us by sending this 9-year-old out onto the porch with body armor on? And so we, mental health said that he wanted to know. That was a subtle message that he was sending to us, that he's not in danger because I'm going to shoot him. If something's going to happen to him, Mr. Cop, it's because you guys are probably going to shoot him. And so after a full night of zero dialogue. We get him on the phone with the godmother. He's cussing us up one side and down the other. It's not the greatest dialogue in the world, but I go from zero dialogue to it now. At least he's acknowledging that he hates us. So from my perspective, that's progress because I went from zero to at least something.
Right.
And so it was around 7 o'clock in the morning when they told me to send my team home. You guys have been at this too long. We have another team coming in for relief. Go home, get some rest, come back, and we'll pick it up when you guys get back. Difficult thing to do. As a commander, that's one of the hardest things to do, is to tell your team, your time's up. There's another team that's going to come in and take over from you, because the canned response that I got back then always was 5 more minutes, boss. All we need is 5 more minutes. And I'm like, hey, yeah, we've been kicking this thing around for 10 hours now. 5 more minutes is probably not going to get us. So we got relieved by another jurisdiction and we left. And I tried to go home, get some sleep. That just didn't work. And then my team supervisor, who is the next in command to me when I'm not around, she says, she called me up. She goes, you need to get back here now. This thing is going sideways fast. So I get back and I could tell that the whole tenor of the entire event had changed. It's one of those things where you can't put your finger on it initially, but everything felt different. Everything felt different. There was almost like a smell in the air. And as I get out of my car and I'm walking towards the command bus, that's my seat, as the commander of the hostage negotiation team. I walk past the robot stand and I see the images coming back on the robot stand. I got two negotiators at the robot stand, and they're watching the robot camera that's pointing at the front of the house. And I see the APC, the armored personnel carrier. And I see what appears to be a civilian outside of the APC waving at the front of the house.
Mhm.
And so I'm telling myself that, something's not right here. Something's going wrong. And I walk past the negotiator bus and I take a look inside. I see my two negotiators sitting at the console, and they're still trying to ring the phone inside the house. And I get to the command bus and I see my team supervisor outside of the command bus. Now she's supposed to be on the bus because when I'm not around, she takes my spot. She's
Mhm.
not on the bus, and she is, I want to use other words. I'll just say she's angry. And she goes, it's a mess. And I said, what are you doing out here? She goes, they won't let me on the bus. And so I open the door and I get on the bus, and it's complete chaos inside the bus. There's way more people inside this bus than there needs to be. And then I look in my seat, and in my seat sits this commander from another agency, which is a no-no. When we swap out packages, we swap out entire packages. So you can't call my agency and say, hey, we want Derek Gaunt to be the commander of our negotiation team. If you call me, you're calling my team. If you're calling my team, you're calling my SWAT team.
Mhm.
And so we've got a hodgepodge, a mixture of people. Immediately when he sees me, he stands up and he says, this is the most effed up thing I've ever seen. And he walks off the bus. That's how I'm greeted when I come back to the bus. And so I asked one of the commanders on the bus, he was a patrol commander, and I said, what's going on? And he says, we're having this other team, SWAT team, relieve our SWAT team because we're going to do a hostage rescue, and we want our team to do the rescue, so we want them to get rest before they do the rescue. And my question to him was, what has changed between the time that I left and now? And he says, Mental health says that he's suicidal. And I said, mental health said that at 6 a.m. this morning. What has changed? We don't, and then the second response is, we don't know how long the kid is going to be out of danger. And I said, the mental health people said the kid is not in danger unless we go in. So I asked the question again, what has changed? And his response to me was, we're not going to let this go into another night. And I'm thinking to myself, you got to be kidding me. We're letting time dictate. Don't get me wrong. Time always is a factor, but it should not be a driving force as to the ultimate driving force as to whether or not we go. And
Right, because you don't want the kid to get hurt.
exactly.
Right.
Because here's the thing. The two most dangerous times for a hostage is during the initial taking and then when we go in and try to rescue them. That's when they're most likely to die, during the initial taking and then when they're being rescued. And so it's not a conversation that you can have flippantly. There's got to be a lot of deliberation. You need to be able to articulate that you tried other nonviolent means first. You got to
Right.
be able to articulate that that the dynamics have changed as such that somebody is in imminent danger. You have to be able to articulate all of those things, and they really couldn't. And so I voiced my dissension in that decision. Eventually, it fell on reasonable ears, and this idea of a rescue was called off. But they said, we've got to do something. You see, this is the action imperative. We've got to do something. And one of the suggestions was, we're going to send the bot up the stairs and we're going to break and rake a window to see what kind of response you get from the inside. And my reaction was, what kind of response do you think you're going to get if you send a robot up to break and rake a window with this guy that we have seen, he's got a long gun propped up in the corner of the doorway of the house. We saw it when the door opened up when he pushed the kid out with the ballistic. The forward observers were able to see that he had a long gun laying there. So what kind of response do you think you're going to get with a robot breaking and raking? And so they said, yeah, we got to do something. Well, when they relayed that to the SWAT team was like, no, because what's going to happen is that robot's going to become incapacitated on that porch, and that's going to be yet another obstacle that we got to overcome if we do have to go in. So they
Mhm.
shot that down, and so they said, all right, well, we want to send a robot up with a bullhorn to encourage him to come out and take the bullhorn so he can talk to us. And I'm like, if that's where I am, if that's where I've moved these people in their decision making process to the point where they're just going to take a bullhorn, clamp it into the robot, and send the robot up, as opposed to something disastrous with a rescue, I'm good with that. And that's what we did.
They respond to the bullhorn sometimes. They're actually willing to engage that way.
That was the first and only time I've ever heard of anything like that.
Okay.
First and only time I've heard anything like that. But see, the dynamics at play here was, here I am, a lieutenant, a subordinate commander on this bus, telling a deputy chief of police and captains what I think that they should do. And that is me talking bottom up, not getting top down, and that flies in the face of ego and authority. I don't want to go any further than that. So we send the robot up with a bullhorn to coax him out of the house, and as I stand here, the robot comes up. We're on the phone. We're saying, go out, take the bullhorn. He comes out onto the front porch, and he looks down the stairs at the bullhorn and the robot. The problem with it, Rafi, is he's got a handgun with him in his hand. And so again, I still have two people in the APC who are negotiating with him through the PA system. But now they're not so much negotiating as they're driving intelligence, because from where the SWAT guys are deployed, they can't really see the front of the house right now. The
Mhm.
actual arrest element can't see the front of the house. So my negotiator is on the PA saying, put the gun down, don't come down the stairs with the gun, to let them know he's outside with the gun. And then he starts to make his way down the steps. Now, the arrest plan was, as soon as he hits the bottom of the stairs, we're going to throw. We've got people stationed on um, opposite sides of the front porch at two neighboring homes.
Mhm.
We're going from the east, we're going to deploy diversionary devices. So as soon as he hits the sidewalk, we're going to hit him with DDs. And when the DD takes effect, then we're going to have a non-lethal team hit him with non-lethal rounds, and then the arrest team is going to move in to effect the arrest. That's the game plan. So he comes out.
He's meaning putting him to sleep, or are you talking about something else?
When I say DDs, I'm talking about diversionary devices. So you're just flashbangs is what you're talking about. We're just talking
Oh,
about flashbangs.
okay.
And so he hits the sidewalk. The operator to the east pulls the pin, deploys a flashbang. Bang! The bang goes off. Let me back up. I'm taking some stuff out of order. Robot drops the bullhorn, backs away per his request. He reaches over, picks up the bullhorn, and chucks it into the street and breaks it into 50 million pieces. At that point, they deploy the DD. The bang goes off. At that point, the less lethal is supposed to rise up from behind the lattice and hit this guy, and they miss. Oh no, they don't miss. They pop up and they don't have a clear shot because of the lattice. Now, why did they determine that the lattice was going to impede their shot before taking that position? I don't know. Same time, the arrest team starts to move towards him. Um, he's got his back to the arrest team, so they're in an optimal position. They're moving in to arrest him. The last guy coming around the vehicle in the driveway of the house on the west side of the street starts to move around the car. And what do you think happens? He bumps the car. It sets off the alarm. You know what I mean? Murphy's Law, right? So he hears the alarm go off, and now he pivots towards the arrest team, and he pivots, and he still has the gun in his hand. First, the first operator lets off a 3-round burst, and one of the 3 rounds goes through his face and comes out the back of his head. Why it was not a lethal shot, I have no idea. But we have already told everyone the plan was under no circumstances does he go back into the house. And so when he turned and tried to make his way back up to the house, we actually had to put him down before he got to the front door. But it was difficult because of all of the dynamics at play. It was difficult for my team because of the 6 negotiators that were watching, they were all brand new negotiators. This was their first time out. And their first time out after all the training that we have gone through, where I've told them that, life is the premium. That's what we're trying to protect at all costs. And their first time in the hot seat, they either heard or they watched this guy get killed.
Yeah.
And it was a difficult debrief after the fact.
Also terrible because this kid, at the end of the day, this kid lost his dad, and that's a shame.
Yeah, yeah, and I think about that kid all the time. He's probably almost. He was 9 in 2005. He's probably 28, 29 years old now.
My age.
Yeah, and it was sad. It was sad for a variety of reasons.
It's also interesting for me because I didn't grow up with a dad either. So,
Yeah, you and me both.
oh, you okay? Yeah, yeah. My grandmother raised me. Yep.
But that was the most that was the most difficult. It was and as far as negotiation was concerned, it was difficult for me because I was a part of the negotiation inside of the negotiation. Many people think, hostage negotiation, it's Kevin Spacey talking to the bad guy. And I have negotiators on my team that are deployed to deal with family members, and they're using the same skills that they would with a hostage taker as they would with family. Why? Because the family is in a state of crisis. I use the same skills that I would with a hostage taker that I did with the command staff. Why? Because they're under the same pressures and stresses that a hostage taker is under, which is why they were thinking of all of these crazy ideas to get this thing moving, because they were under pressure. So those are the negotiations within the negotiation. So it's not just that person on the phone with the bad guy. We're negotiating with everybody during the course of that event. I'm negotiating with the SWAT commander to say, hey, going right now is probably not the right move. And the SWAT guys, they're action oriented. They're only satisfied with waiting a finite period of time before they're ready to go. And so I've got to talk to him to talk to his people about tamping down his desire to go.
Wild. That's so crazy. Well, that's definitely a story. What's my brain was creating a video in my mind the entire time, getting in it, trying to put a picture, paint a picture of exactly how this went down. I'm sure that's what people do in general, but I'm a very visual person.
Yeah,
So
and it's there's never a time without there's always comic relief during these events. It's just it's some of the wildest and funniest things in hindsight happen during the event. You don't really pay attention to them as they're going on, but after the fact, when you talk about them, you're like, that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. And this particular incident, we were taking our remote phone and we were going to attach it to the bot, send the bot up the hill to the stairs, because at the time we didn't really have a reliable way of communicating with him. So we wanted him to take one of our remote phones.
right.
And so technology was such that they're working more and more wirelessly now, but it was a hard line, and the hard line starts to get wrapped up in the tracks of the robot to the point where it impeded the robot, and the robot started shivering in the middle of the street, and then it just fell over. And so now we've got to come up with resources, manpower, to put together a team behind shields to go up and rescue the robot. And so they form a team to go up and they rescue the robot. Then they take out their fancy SWAT knives and they cut the phone cord, pull the phone out, and take my phone, and they throw it in the bushes, and they grab the robot and they pick it up. And now these guys are running back to the staging area with this robot. And I asked the SWAT commander, I said, "Where's my phone?" And so he gets on the radio and goes, "Where's the phone?" He goes, "We threw it in the bushes up there." I was like, that phone is 15 grand. Somebody's got to go get that thing. And so now they got to formulate a team to go up and rescue the phone.
What technology do you have in it that makes it that expensive?
That I won't go into, but it's expensive.
Right.
And so now they have to formulate a team to go back up and get the phone and bring it back to me so that our tech guy can put it back together.
I thought the mustache compliment was going to get me these answers, but hey. Okay, so this is insane. Very interesting stuff. You're the first hostage negotiator, SWAT guy in general that I've had on my show after close to 190 episodes. You're going to be at episode 189, so I'm close to 200.
Nice.
Yes.
Good work.
Thank you, man. Thank you. It's just a lot of hustle and doing what I love. So what has hostage negotiation taught you about people in general? Now, let me try to be a little bit more specific in my question, because it's a very broad question. Say in everyday interactions with people, what are normal human behaviors where you say, okay, most people are this way or most people are that way? I mean, I guess it's I'm trying to give you a little more. I know in my mind what I'm trying to ask you, but at the end of the day, it is pretty broad. I guess ultimately a good example of this is, say you're in sales, like I am. I'm a real estate agent. And you mentioned earlier in the episode that hostage negotiation, mastering it, is the idea of getting people to do what you need them to do ultimately, right? You're how does that, I'm actually planning on asking you how it has helped your marriage. I'm assuming you have a wife and kids, right?
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to eventually ask you how that's helped your marriage and your relationship with your children, but How has that helped you? How would you say that correlates to business and building rapport with people?
Hostage negotiation is about understanding the human nature response, which dictates that negative emotions and negative dynamics drive decision making and drive behavior. Period. Full stop. Once you get your head around that, people become predictable. You can begin to predict what they're going to do and what they're going to say next because of your understanding of that human nature response. And so in hostage negotiation, we're always looking for the information that's going to help us demonstrate to the other side that we understand what their perspective is, what their worldview is. Because at the end of the day, in sales, in hostage negotiations, if you don't understand my worldview, you don't understand me. You don't understand me, meaningful dialogue is not going to take place. You're not going to be able to convince me of Jack until you convince me that you understand what my perspective is.
Mm,
That's what it's all about. Getting out of your own way. Stop in hostage negotiation and sales. Stop leading with your goal and objective. Stop leading with the data that supports your goal and objective. You can get to your goal and objective later in the conversation. Right now, you should be focusing on the negative emotions and dynamics that the other person has about you, about the situation, about the environment, based on evidence or based on their own paranoia. It doesn't really matter. Perspective is everything. And so my question, because I get this question a lot, my question to people who pose this question is, okay, my goal and objective as a hostage negotiator is to get the person to surrender, put down their weapon, let the hostages go, and then submit to authority. That's my goal and objective. And then my question to the people I share this with is, how many times do you think I led with that? When I called inside the crisis site and I said, hey, Rafi, it's Derek from the police department. My goal and objective is to have you surrender, release all those hostages, and then come out here and submit to authority. And the answer to that question is I never led with that.
right.
Why? Because Rafi's not ready to hear that yet.
No.
At some point, I'm going to share that with Rafi, but it's not going to be at the beginning of the conversation. And in sales, what we are conditioned to chase, convince, and then close. Chase, convince, close. That's our overall three-step model. We're going to chase, we're going to convince, and we're going to close. And so we get the sequencing all screwed up, where we go into the conversation and we pitch gain, we pitch benefit, we pitch our value proposition, and then we make our ask, and we're baffled when the other side goes, no, I'm not ready. Or worse, I'll think about it and get back to you, knowing that they're never going to get back to you. Because why? You made that conversation all about you, had nothing to do with them. You may think it did. I did my due diligence. I know what their pain points are. Bullcrap. You know part of the picture. When you go into a sales conversation, I don't care how much research you've done on that prospective client, there are things that are going on with them that you have no clue about, that you will only discover when you have a conversation with them. Likewise, a hostage taker. We do a boatload of intel dumping before we're getting as much as we can before we get on the phone with this guy. We've got his pedigree by the time we're making contact, most times, not always, most times. And we know that even though we've got this background, we don't have the full picture, because there's information that both sides have that they're keeping from the other side.
For sure.
Even in conversations where you're talking to current clients, people that you've worked with before, they're hiding information from you.
So this is exactly what I wanted to ask you, Derek. I've been like excited to ask you this. Say, here's a good example, right? I'm a real estate agent. I make calls, all right? I'm calling 200 sellers. I get to number 100. It's a guy named Sam. Sam is pretty friendly. He's gotten a ton of calls prior to my call that day. And he's still nonetheless friendly and says, hey, I am interested in selling, but Market seems a little tough right now. I'm really not desperate, but if I could sell it, great. The property was at he was asking $800,000. He wasn't really getting too many showings. He got an offer for 750, didn't want to take it. But what we don't know, what he's not willing to tell me because he doesn't know me and only spoke to me on the phone, I'm a complete stranger, is that he really does need to sell it. He's in dire straits. He's very low on cash. Married guy, 2 kids, needs to sell, but he doesn't want to give this vulnerability over to a stranger, especially a realtor he doesn't know, who he feels might jump down his throat the moment he shows vulnerability. So with your knowledge in hostage negotiation, and I've gotten better at this over the course of time, but I can always get better and learn. How would you apply your knowledge and what you just told me to properly show this person, hey, I'm not going to jump down your throat and squeeze you for everything you got. What's the real issue here? What's causing you not to meet the market where it needs to be to sell? And how can I, as the agent, make sure this person trusts me to let me know what's going on?
All right. So first of all, as soon as Sam picks up the phone, I don't care if Sam is number one, number 99, or if he's the first call.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is busy. Everybody would rather be doing something else than taking a phone call from you. Most likely, to your point, they have been hit by phone calls like this over and over and over again. Most likely, they don't trust real estate agents, especially after the decision with NAR and the class action lawsuit. They think you are thieves, you are charlatans, you are trying to fleece them in order to line your own pockets.
Mm-hmm.
What I just said to you should be one of the first 4 or 5 things out of your mouth after you greet Sam and tell him who you are. Take permission and authority away from Sam from using those excuses against you during the course of the conversation. You're mitigating the negatives before he even speaks them. And Sam's listening to you on the other end of that phone and like, all right, I have gotten 50 calls from 50 different agents. None of them sound like this guy. Everybody else that I've talked to has been trying to push their agenda so they can get my listing. And
So here, interject. Sorry. So while most realtors would be talking about how amazing they are versus all the other bad ones, I'm saying, oh no, I completely understand why you wouldn't want to talk to any of us.
yep,
We don't exactly have the best reputation.
without question. Now, you're not saying that's you. You're saying you probably think this about real estate. You're not copying
Right.
to anything. You're not saying this is
Right.
me. You're saying this is
Right.
what you're probably thinking about us within the industry. And nobody in your space, nobody in any sales space has the courage to take a negative light and point it back at themselves in the presence of potential business.
Totally.
And and if you suggest that to anybody, they're going to look at you like you have 3 heads. But that you want to, if you ask people, create an avatar for a real estate agent.
Phone. I got to hear you talk to a seller on the phone. Oh my God, I would love that.
There is no difference in the avatar. If I asked 100 people, create an avatar of a real estate agent, most of the 80 out of those 100 agents would all look the same. They would all
Right.
sound the same. So how do you differentiate yourself? Well, I'm going to start my phone call with Sam by saying, Sam, listen, I know this phone call is the last thing you wanted to take today. You have probably been inundated with calls like this over the past 3 to 4 months. You probably believe that we within the real estate industry are nothing but charlatans and thieves.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to be thinking to yourself, how long is this guy going to keep me on the phone? I guarantee you all of those things are going through his head the minute that he picks up the phone and you announce who you are. Now, to your question is, how do you find out what's really driving? Understand this. And this should be something you should write on a piece of paper and have it with you all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you have a reason for it. That is a label. Looks like, seems like, sounds like is a label of a dynamic. It's your interpretation of data you're getting from the other side. One of the best go-to labels is it sounds like you have a reason for asking that, doing that, saying that. So when I hear Sam say, I'm not desperate to sell, but I will sell if the price is right, that could mean any number of things. And I'm not clear on which avenue he's trying to go down. And so my response to that would be, sounds like you have a reason for saying that.
Mm.
And then you're more likely to get to the true motivation behind the statement, because people never tell you what they mean. In
So
every
brilliant.
conversation, Rafi, there's a presenting dynamic or emotion, and then there's a latent dynamic or emotion. And as human beings, we're focused on the presenting, and the presenting are the exact words that come out of the counterpart's mouth. When reality tells us, history tells us, experience tells us, what comes out of their mouth is not always what they meant. The question that they ask is not the right question. They will ask you question A, they want the answer to question B, but for whatever reason, they won't ask you question B. So before I beat myself up with not being able to figure out what the motivation is, I put it back on them. Sounds like you have a reason for asking me that. And that usually brings out exactly what's going on beneath the surface. And when you can show the other side that you're trying to determine what's under the surface as opposed to that low-hanging fruit above the surface, it sends the signal that this guy is really trying to get it. He's trying to
Mm.
get it. He understands that I'm sending him other signals. And you will be fulfilling a need that all of us have, whether it's a hostage taker or a potential client, and that is to have someone else articulate what our perspective is. We want someone else to listen to us on that deep level, because most of us don't get it in our personal life. Most of us don't get it in our professional life. I guarantee you this person, Sam, doesn't get it anywhere either. And if you were to approach Sam in the manner that I just described, you would lock in with him almost instantaneously, because he ain't getting it nowhere else. He's going to love talking to you and not know why.
So okay, so wait, so what was the phrase again? Let's say he says, I don't need to sell, but I'd like to. You would say, what was the phrase again? Because I do want to make sure.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like you have a reason for saying that.
Sounds like you have a reason for saying that. Okay, got you.
And
That's
then he gives you more. Yeah, I
yeah.
I I don't need the sale, but of course, if the price is right, I'll do the dance with anybody.
Well, here's a question also. This is great. This is fantastic. And by the way, Derek, I've done this with people. I've done this with people. I've made thousands of calls. So over the course of time, you start to learn what works and what doesn't. But this is very helpful. What would you say to somebody? Because this very common theme now is sellers now are not willing to lower their price to the point that they need to get it sold. So in the market, especially in South Florida, especially with condos, there are a lot of new costs associated with condos now. There was a collapsing building. Maybe you've heard of it. So now different counties, different cities are requiring buildings to meet code. They're slapping on new assessments. They have to meet any structural demands, code violations, any pending lawsuits, liens, etc. So it's costing these owners a lot of money, and thereby affecting the market. It's slowed down for that reason. So sellers, though, have an idea in their mind of what they want to sell a property for. And oftentimes now it doesn't fall in line with what the buyer is willing to pay. So what do you think would be a smart way to help the buyer understand? And I've been able to I'm getting better at these conversations with sellers. Anyhow, what would you say, though, to help them understand that instead of just throwing data at them? Helping, maybe aside from helping them understand, but trying to figure out, getting to the bottom of why they're so reluctant to do it, even if that is probably the best decision for them, as opposed to just sitting on the market forever, not knowing when that'll.
All right. So think about it what it looks like from their perspective. When someone tells you, I don't want to sell for anything less than $100, that's the presenting dynamic. What are they telling? What's the latent dynamic? What did I not say with those words? What are you hearing? When I tell you, and I'm using $100 because I'm not good at math and it's easy for me
Right.
to work from 100.
Yeah.
So I tell you, Rafi, listen, um, I'll let you list my house, but I'm not listing, I will not accept anything less than $100. List it for wherever you want. I don't want, I'm not, in fact, I want you to list it for 120. I don't want
Right.
to take anything less than 120. What are you hearing there? Now,
And
immediately, as an agent, your mind goes to, oh, I just need to show him the comps and the market stats, and he would understand that that's way out of line with the realities of the environment. Well, hold on a second, Rafi. I'm not ready to hear your reality because I'm operating from an emotional standpoint. When I'm asking you to perform for me outside the realities of the environment, that's almost always coming from an emotional spot. And so, what I'm telling you, I'm not going to put you on the spot and make you answer this. I'll give it to you because, for the sake of time, what I said was, I want you to list for 120, not a penny less. And you say to me, well, it's probably going to sit on the market for a while. I don't care. That's what I
right.
want. What I'm telling you is, I don't want to be taken advantage of. I don't
Right.
have money stolen from me because when somebody takes advantage of me financially, that's a reflection on my competency, my character, and my integrity. And I don't want any of those assailed. And anything less than 120 is going to be an assailing of my competency, my integrity, and my character. I will protect those until the day I die. That's what he's telling you. I don't want to be disrespected by a lowball offer. And so that's what you have to acknowledge first. You can get to the comps later. That's what you have to accomplish first. Demonstrate for him that you understand. It sounds to me like you are worried about being taken advantage of in this
You
volatile.
know, you know what? I never thought that some of the best real estate advice I was going to get would be from a hostage negotiator.
And here's the reason why. It's not because I'm a genius. It's because I understand that human nature response. I understand that negative emotions drive people to do everything.
Yes.
Everything that we do is based on fear. The fear that we're talking about here, the fear of having my reputation disrespected. That's what I'm afraid of when I say don't list it for anything less than 120.
No, you actually you understand the human emotion. This is at 100.
And he will never admit that unless you bring it up first. But as soon as you bring it up, you will actually see a reaction in their countenance. It will actually improve because under the surface, instinctually, they're communicating that to you and they're hoping that you pick it up. And
Right.
once you do, they're like, finally, I
Yeah.
got someone.
Yes, that's
And
so funny. This is I understand this, but I didn't understand this the way I needed to. Like I because I in personal relationships, I've really thank God I've come to become very good at this. And I think I I would I would like to believe I think I get it from my grandmother. She's an older woman. She raised me. She's a woman in general, and I've always felt like I've had that ability to connect with people and quickly by understanding these things, the subtleties of their emotions. In business, it could be a little different, right? Because I'm not necessarily looking to become friends with them. There's business in mind, so things get a little tricky. But that's a very good point. They don't want to go any lower than a price, even though they may know that they're not being realistic. And instead of trying to data them to death and throw analytics at them, you need to understand where they're coming from.
yes, and here's the beautiful part about that. Once you do that, you encourage reciprocity. Now they want to give back to you. Now, because you lent them an empathic ear, they want to do the same for you. And now they're ready to hear all of your data. Now they're ready to listen to you about comps and the reality of the environment because you first did it with them. And even in a business context, listen, I was never friends with anybody that I negotiated with back in the hostage negotiator days. You don't have to like them. You don't have to agree with them.
Right.
What you have to do more than what you just said, because you said I think I have a pretty good handle on understanding other people's emotions. That ain't enough. You need to articulate that understanding. That's where the gold is found.
Mhm.
Understanding that I'm angry means if you understand that I'm angry, you understand I'm frustrated, you understand that I feel betrayed, means nothing to me if you don't articulate it. You
Right.
can understand all you want, but if you don't tell me you understand, by demonstrate, or if you don't demonstrate, not tell me, if you don't demonstrate that you understand, you can keep it because it's doing me no good. Then that's the biggest challenge is, especially in real estate. I've never seen an industry that is a people industry where people are afraid to talk to other people. It blows my mind that you guys, by and large, not everyone, but the majority of agents out there, why are you guys so beholden to scripts? You're so beholden to scripts because you don't know how to talk on your own. You don't know how to
Oh,
talk to
uh,
another human being.
that is so funny you said that, and that is why I started a while ago I started doing role play back and forth, and it was beneficial. I couldn't do these scripts. It's like what? Because I realized that I'm a natural schmoozer, and when I got on the phone with people, I just had fun with it. Meaning I was serious, but if somebody had a funny name, I'm that asshole that's making a joke out of their name, and they're cracking up from it. And I'd say, "Oh, if I can guess what country you're from, you got to give me whatever it was. You got to get me an appointment," or I would make some joke, and people. I've had amazing conversations with people, incredible conversations with people over the phone because I wasn't scripty, and I think I've still taken some of the scripts, and they're still planted in my mind, but it's never been my thing. It's never been my thing.
And what I like about what you just said is when you begin a conversation like that, see, the whole idea of applying hostage negotiations practices and principles to the business world is we were masters at removing ourselves as a threat to the hostage taker. And likewise, in business, it's incumbent upon you as fast as you can in the interaction, remove yourself as a threat. And so when you start with a joke about a name, or you start with, let me guess what country you're from, that playful introduction goes a long way into removing you as a threat because anybody anywhere on the planet would do anything for you if two things were true. A, it's within their capability, and B, they trust you. And the only way they're going to trust you is if you're not threatening to them. And as a real estate agent, and for all of your followers, please understand this. As a real estate agent, the minute that you engage somebody, they go on the defensive.
Yep.
As soon as they find out what you do, their hands go up and
Yep.
they're in protection mode because why? You are a threat, not because of anything you've done, but because of the industry or the space that you occupy. So
Yep.
your job, you should be going overboard to do everything you can to remove that threat of a prism through which they look at you.
Totally. Very good advice. Yeah, that's excellent. Okay. Now, he gave me an amazing answers on the business side of things. Where do you say how do you find that understanding human response and human nature has allowed you to have a fruitful relationship, which I hope you do have. You seem like you do. You just really give off that kind of energy that you do. Would you agree with that? Would you say you're happily married?
Oh
Pretty.
yeah, yeah, without question. You hear that? Yes, I am.
I would love if she actually responded. Uh, what do you think were what has helped you?
Um,
What are some principles? Give me some principles.
Principle number one, stay curious. Assume that regardless of how long you've known the person, during each engagement,
This goes for men and women, or is this more of a
yeah,
male?
yeah, it is men, women, personal, professional.
Got it.
Assume that you have something to learn in the conversation because you do. I've lived under the roof with this woman for the past 30 plus years.
Wow.
Right. And if I go into every conversation with her staying curious, I'm showing interest. And interested persons become interesting person, meaning she's going to return the favor to me. She doesn't always need, this is especially as men, she doesn't always need me to rebuttal listen with her. And when I talk about rebuttal listening, I'm talking about listening to her long enough till I hear enough where I can formulate a solution to the problem. And now I'm just waiting for her to shut up so I can jump in and tell her what the solution is. Staying curious will allow her to vent without me trying to problem solve because many times that's all she wants.
Yeah.
In fact, I've gotten to the point where I've said, advice, listen, opine. Which one of the three do you want me to do? You want me to give you advice? You want me to just listen, or you just want me to editorialize and give you my opinion? More often than not, she goes, I just want you to listen. I'm like, cool, go. And then and she'll throw up all of that information and all of a sudden she wants to hear what's going on with me. I'm not
Right.
as verbose as she is, so I'm like, I'm cool, I'm good. But because I gave her the opportunity, she, like I was talking about earlier, reciprocity, reciprocity, reciprocity. She wants to give it back to me. And so staying curious and assuming that you have something to learn, assuming that you don't have the complete picture, because even if it's with a spouse or a family member, you don't have the complete picture, especially when you're dealing with a spouse or a family member. And for God's sakes, a business person, if they are operating outside the realities of the environment, it's always coming from an emotional place. And so you need to ask yourself, all right, where's that coming from? You need to stay curious and become a detective and figure out where is that actually coming from. And when you can start, this is what I've done with her and other close family members. When I start to articulate for them things that they're not saying, not articulating for them things that they are saying, when I start to articulate things that they're not saying, that's when the relationship becomes really strong because as I mentioned earlier in the call, you start to take on the role of a mind reader.
So what's an example of that?
Somebody says to me, um, I can't believe she did this to me again. This is like the fourth time. I hate her for this. This is killing me. And I say, it sounds like you've reached your tolerance level with her persistent betrayal. And they're like, they never used the word betrayed. They never used the word persistent.
Mm-hmm.
They said, I can't believe that she's done this multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate her for it. And it's killing me. And I pulled out betrayal. I'm probably going to throw in something about the pain that he's going through or she's going through. And they never used any of those words. And so I'm pulling out things beneath the surface. From their perspective, they're standing on the ridgeline waving a red flag saying, hey, Derek, recognize this betrayal, recognize this hurt. And when I can do that, man, you're in. You're in.
So true. So interesting.
The
This
bottom
is
line is you need to get off of the surface. When somebody says, um, I'm not paying the buyer's agent crap, you guys work it out, but I ain't paying the buyer's agent nothing. That's not what they're telling. They're saying something else entirely. And when you can lift up that rock to figure out what that is, you'll see it'll be easier for them, for you to move them into the direction of agreeing to pay some of that compensation for.
you handle that.
Yeah. Huh?
How would you handle that?
It sounds like you're worried about being taken advantage of by the buyer's agent.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't.
It feels like if you pay, you'll be contributing to what NAR already said was dirty practices.
Uh,
Just to let them know that you heard what they said on the surface level, but you know that there's an ulterior motive or meaning. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's 100% effective, but people are when initial statements are cries for help. And
okay.
when you
Might
could answer
they
that
might
cry for help.
they might just say, yeah, totally, and I don't want to pay it. You know. But
Yeah,
I my response to that, and this is really the biggest truth of it, and so far the sellers I am working with have been very receptive to it. As I say, hey, you don't have to pay it if you don't want to pay it, and as your agent, I'm not going to sit here and convince you to do so. Would you like to know what my thoughts are? And they say, yes, of course. Well, being that the commissions were technically always negotiable, we are seeing that sellers, for the most part, the large majority of the time, are still covering both sides. Do you want to know why that is? And I'd say, yeah, sure. Tell me why that is. Well, now that we're in the kind of market that we're in, which is more of a buyer's market, properties are typically sitting for a longer period of time on the market. And that being the case, most sellers now, like I said before, are covering the buyer's commission. And so if you are not willing to do so, or I could probably word it a little bit differently, but if paying the commission to the buy side wouldn't be something you'd like to do you think that might make things a little more challenging as far as competing with the other properties on the market that are willing to do so? And say, okay. And then I also explain that if the interest rates were, say, at 3% and you're getting 20 to 30 offers on your property, you now as the seller have the leverage. So my feeling going away from this role play is I think if the market was going in the complete opposite direction, sellers would have that ability to say, hey, I understand you expect me to pay commission, meaning the seller could say that to the buyer, essentially. I understand you expect me to pay commission, but I have 20 other buyers that are willing to pay their agents. So take a hike. It really comes down to supply and demand. I think that's what's going to make all the difference as to whether these.
yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Mhm.
What was my problem with your response? My problem with your response is number one, you didn't what I want you to do, if you could do that conversation all over again, the first thing I would want you to do is try to dig out those latent dynamics or emotions first,
Mhm.
right? The second thing I would have you do is you're talking to this seller. This seller has already fantasized, my word, about what this process is going to look like and what the outcome is going to be if it
Mhm.
allows you to list that property. That's the next thing that I want to pull out of his head. So, Mr. Seller, it seems like you have a pretty good vision on what this process is going to look like from soup to nuts,
Right.
from the time I list to the time that we go to closing,
Right.
followed by dynamic silence. And now you're watching, you're gathering data with your eyes. Your second move is going to be, or your next move is going to be, would you be opposed to walking me through that vision? And let him go first. Now, it may be a robust response. It may be a response that begs for more substance. It's really immaterial what he says because the point that we're trying to make or go for here is to give him an opportunity to go first. You see, he's accustomed to dealing with agents who want to explain, 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 explain. And now here you are flipping the script and asking him, what's your vision on what this is going to look like? Now, you're going to be listening to see where does it merge with the realities of the environment? Where does it diverge? And you're going to be highlighting those in your mind at the very least. After you have allowed him to go through and you guys have had some back and forth over that, you're just simply going to say to him, would you be against me walking you through what the realities of the environment are?
Mhm.
Subtle way of saying that you're off base, pal. And I'm going to take you to school. And I'm going to tell you what the realities of this environment are. And then your explanation that you just laid out so eloquently, that's when you do that. The other thing I would have you get away from is asking those yes-oriented questions. Would you like me to walk you through the realities of selling or dealing with a buyer in today's environment? You're driving him for a yes. You want him to say yes to that question. There was another, I can't remember which one it was, but there was another yes-oriented question that you asked him. The problem with yes-oriented questions is I know you want me to say yes. I feel you taking me somewhere. I haven't volunteered to go. And on some level, I'm resentful for that.
So as
So
opposed, you could say, "Are you opposed?"
exactly. Getting them to say no in agreement to what you actually want them to do. I'm continually, and you will too, once you start to use this stuff, you will continually be amazed at what you can get people to agree to if you just allow them to say no.
So
That
I
they
know this. This I do. Yes, I've been really focusing on this as of I'd say the last couple of months. I've made that much more of a conscious thought when I have these conversations.
yeah.
Giving them freedom to say no versus trying to get them to a yes. Much very powerful. And I know that, and I understand that for myself. Because when I when you explain this to me, I think of how I would respond, and I would feel a lot more comfortable being able to say no to something than having feeling the pressure of having to say yes.
Well, and think of it this way, no is always protection. Yes is always obligation and commitment.
Yep, yep. Very true. It's so funny. Yeah, it's really interesting. So you kind of shifting back to the relationship conversation. You mentioned what either a man or woman can do, what some very important principles are to get along with people. Do you have specific advice for men? You know, being that we are typically more solution oriented, we're maybe more straightforward. We're not as emotionally driven. What are things that?
Oh, shit,
Yeah,
that is a misconception. We are as emotionally driven as a woman. We like to pretend like we're not, but for the very fact, if I tell a man that he's being emotional, he will snap back at me and say, I'm never emotional. That's an emotion. I'm never driven. I'm not yelling. Yeah, you are. You are yelling. And so get rid of this idea that men are not emotional. Beings are naturally emotional. Our hippocampus and amygdala are designed based around emotion. And those two things are in our brains. Those two things have kept us alive for thousands of years, man and woman. And so this idea that we are devoid of emotion is a misconception. Now,
you think we're equally as emotional? Because it doesn't
oh,
seem like
no, I don't think that we're equally as emotional, but this idea that we are devoid, no way, buddy. No way, no
I don't
way. You
think
tell
that.
them, tell if you know a man who says I am a reasonable, logical person who keeps his emotions in check, challenge something that's important to him and watch the response that you get. It ain't going to be a cerebral or logical response. It's going to be an emotional one.
Right.
Um, we tend to process our emotions differently. Men are certainly more destructive when their emotions get out of control than women are. But that may have a lot to do with the fact that women aren't afraid to, loosen the lid on that cap a little bit to let some out, where we will just keep pushing it down and pushing it down, pushing it down until
Right.
we can't
Till
take
the,
it anymore.
till the
But
cat.
to your point, um, men historically have taken the position of driver, leader, protector, and problem solver. And um, instinctively, that's what we want to do anytime we engage anybody, man or woman. And so
Right.
that's a desire. I mean, not a desire, but that's a characteristic that we have to keep in check. There's a great video that I use in training all the time. You can Google it or go on YouTube and find it. The title of the video is "It's Not About the Nail," and it's a man and a woman.
Oh, that video on the couch.
Yes, yes.
I love that video.
That video is classic.
Oh my God.
And you may have the answer, but the person that you're dealing with is not ready to hear your answer or your solution. They just want to vent at that moment in time. All of us have been on the phone with that family member or friend that is hysterical about something that's going on in their life. And you're listening to them talk and you're like, oh my God, the solution for this is so easy.
Right.
If they were just X, Y, Z, this would be over.
Yeah.
And you're trying to figure out why can't they see that? Well, they can't see it because they're emotionally vested. If they're emotionally vested, when that hippocampus and the amygdala fire up, it constricts what's
Like with relationships, you're younger, or even not, but you have a friend that's just making a horrible relationship decision. And you're like, wow, this is so clear. And they're complaining about it and complaining about it. And it's like, well,
yeah.
just get out of it, just walk away. But they can't, and
No,
it's
they
under
can't. Because to my point, the prefrontal cortex is
totally.
being constricted. Um, the amygdala, the hippocampus, that overrides everything. The amygdala in our brain, it's only about the size of an almond. It's not that big, but when it fires up, it takes over almost everything. And this is why people, back in the police days, I got a call one time from see the woman about a theft from her property. I go to the address, elderly woman living in this home, brownstone type house in a not so nice neighborhood, and somebody stole her garden gnome from in front of the bushes out in front of the house. And this woman was hysterical. I mean, just crying like she lost a loved one. And I'm listening to her and I'm thinking to myself, lady, I'll take you down to Home Depot and buy you another garden gnome right now. That was the logical solution to her problem from my perspective. She wasn't trying to hear that because emotionally she was a wreck. Emotionally, she couldn't see the most obvious solution to her stolen gnome problem.
Mhm.
And she would not see the solutions to that stolen gnome problem until she's had a chance to, for lack of a better term, dump her bucket. When emotions are high, rational thinking is low.
Right.
Which is why we go after these as vehemently as we do, because I want to bring this back up to here. This is the normal functioning level.
Sure.
This is where I can start to offer solutions and help the person problem solve. Not when it's like this.
Okay, so kind of going back into that thing as a guy, right? So we have to sometimes focus, and sometimes we want to be heard too. There are times where I have an answer. I really think I have the answer, but I want to be heard out. For example, here's a really good example of this. On the entrepreneurial journey, even if I don't have all the answers, even if I don't know how long it'll take to accomplish X, sometimes it's nice to have a friend to talk to just hear me out on the challenges I've gone through to get to where I want to be. I don't expect
Where,
that looking for the answer.
right. Where and if you recall, let's go back close to the top of the previous hour when we started this conversation. When I said to you, all of us have an undying need to have someone else understand where we're coming from. All of us want to be listened to at that level. That when you're talking to that buddy, you already have the answer. So you and I are buddies, you already have the answer, but you just want me to hear what you've gone through and how you came up with the answer that you ultimately landed on.
Yeah, some encouragement like, bro, you got this, you're the man, or whatever,
And
whatever it
every
is.
time I say that to you, bro, you got this, you're the man, great idea. Or I don't say anything except for give you minimal encouragers where I'm just, yeah. Really? No shit. And I give you all of that, and dopamine, oxytocin, you're getting hits of that in the brain. And you're like,
Totally.
God bless America, it feels good talking to Derek. Don't know
Right.
why, it just does.
Right.
Bro, everybody has that. And once you start fulfilling that in your personal and professional life, your interactions are going to go more smoothly, faster than you could ever believe.
So interesting.
Yeah, man. But listen, you asked me
Yeah.
about my wife and how strong our relationship is. It's not going to be much stronger if we stay on much longer.
Derek, I got it. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks,
We I
Rafi.
don't know what time is it even right now?
It's a quarter to 4 my time on the East Coast, so I don't know where you are. I guess you're in Miami or Southern
Four.
Florida.
We got almost 2 hours of discussion, man.
Yeah, man. So that's 189 and 190 right there.
You know, man. Okay, so this was really interesting. I really look forward to talking to you again. I look forward to meeting you. So hopefully, I haven't been to DC in several years, but let's see what the future holds. I'm based in Miami, so if you make a trip.
Actually, I'm in the I worked in the DC area. I'm now in Atlanta, so we are even closer than that.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. Oh, great. Okay, cool.
Well,
So yeah, let's hopefully do that. It would be great to eventually meet you.
yeah, man. Of course.
So please feel free at this point, since we're about to close up, to throw in any marketing info, book sales, any finding your book on Amazon.
Yeah, you can find it
Throw it all in.
find it on Amazon. Ego Authority Failure, using emotional intelligence like a hostage negotiator to succeed as a leader. It's basically taking the hostage negotiation practices and principles and giving it to leadership to help them more effectively manage those under their charge. If you want more information about some of the ideas and concepts that I talked about, go to blackswanltd.com. We've got a plethora of free resources there that'll help you round yourself out, real estate specific, other business specific, and for your personal life. And you can find me you can reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn or on Instagram.
Fantastic. All right, guys, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Do you have a YouTube channel?
I do not. I do
Yeah.
not. Not yet. Stay tuned.
Okay, stay tuned. So when he does, we'll have to get everybody to it.
Yeah.
Like, subscribe, and share, of course, for real estate. Make sure to get in touch. That has been the 189th episode of the Soothing Semantics podcast. I will see you on the next one. Stay tuned.